Adivasi is an umbrella term for a heterogeneous set of ethnic and tribal groups considered the aboriginal population of South Asia. Adivasi make up 8.6% of India's population of 104 million according to the 2011 census, and a large percentage of the Nepalese population. They comprise a substantial indigenous minority of the population of India and Nepal. The same term Adivasi is used for the ethnic minorities of Bangladesh, Pakistan, the native Tharu people of Nepal, and also the native Vedda people of Sri Lanka. The word is also used in the same sense in Nepal, as is another word, Janajati, although the political context differed historically under the Shah and Rana dynasties. Adivasi societies are particularly prominent in Andhra Pradesh, Bihar, Chhattisgarh, Gujarat, Jharkhand, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Odisha, Rajasthan, Tamil Nadu, West Bengal and some northeastern states, and the Andaman and Nicobar Islands. Many smaller tribal groups are quite sensitive to ecological degradation caused by modernization. Both commercial forestry and intensive agriculture have proved destructive to the forests that had endured swidden agriculture for many centuries. Adivasis in central part of India have been victims of the Salwar-Judum campaign by the government against the Naxalite insurgency. Connotations of the word Adivasi. Although terms such as Atavika, Vanavasi or Girijan are also used for the tribes of India, Adivasi carries the specific meaning of being the original and autochthonous inhabitants of a given region. It was specifically coined for that purpose in the 1930s. Over time, unlike the terms aborigines or tribes, the word Adivasi has developed a connotation of past autonomy disrupted during the British colonial period in India and not yet having been restored. In Nepal, the infiltration of caste people from west to east through the Middle Hills, then the consolidation of dozens of petty kingdoms by the Shahs followed by the usurpation by the Ranas brought indigenous nationalities under orthodox Hindu rule. It codified their inferior social and political status into a corpus of law known as Muluk-Yain. Although the Shah kings were restored to power in the revolution of 1950, they still governed mostly for and through high caste Bahuns, Takuris, Chetris and Nuas. Enfranchisement of the Adivasi, except the Nuits, seldom advanced beyond lip service. This produced grievances that contributed to the Nepalese Civil War, where the rank and file of guerrilla fighters were largely Adivasi. Nepal had not historical parallels to British interference with Orthodox Hindu discrimination, and there was not much resembling India's significantly effective post-independence efforts to improve the lot of Adivasis. In India, opposition to usage of the term is varied. Critics argue that the original inhabitant contention is based on the fact that they have no land and therefore asking for a land reform. The Adivasis argue that they have been oppressed by the superior group and that they require and demand a reward, more specifically land reform. In northeast India, the term Adivasi applies only to the tea tribes imported from central India during colonial times. All tribal groups refer collectively to themselves by using the English word tribes. Scheduled tribes. The Constitution of India, Article 366 defines scheduled tribes as such tribes or tribal communities are part of groups within such tribes or tribal communities as are deemed under Article 342 to the scheduled tribes for the purposes of this Constitution. In Article 342, the procedure to be followed for specification of a scheduled tribe is prescribed. However, it does not contain the criterion for the specification of any community as scheduled tribe. An often used criterion is based on attributes such as geographical isolation. They live in cloistered, exclusive, remote and inhospitable areas such as hills and forests. Backwardness. The livelihood is based on primitive agriculture, a low-value closed economy with a low level of technology that leads to the poverty. They have low levels of literacy and health. Distinctive culture, language and religion. Communities have developed their own distinctive culture, language and religion. Shyness of contact. They have a marginal degree of contact with other cultures and people. Particularly vulnerable tribal groups. The scheduled tribe groups who were identified as more isolated from the wider community and who maintain a distinctive cultural identity have been categorized as particularly vulnerable tribal groups, previously known as primitive tribal groups, by the government at the center. So far, 75 tribal communities have been identified as particularly vulnerable tribal groups in different states of India. These hunting, food gathering, and some agricultural communities have been identified as less acculturated tribes among the tribal population groups and in need of special programs for the sustainable development. The tribes are awakening and demanding the rights for special reservation quota for them. Geographical Overview. A substantial list of scheduled tribes in India are recognized as tribal under the Constitution of India. Tribal people constitute 8.6% of the nation's total population, over 104 million people according to the 2011 census. One concentration lives in a belt along the Himalayas stretching through Jammu and Kashmir, Himachal Pradesh, and Uttarakhand in the west to Assam, Meghalaya, Tripura, Arunachal Pradesh, Mizoram, Manipur, and Nagaland in the northeast. In the northeastern states of Arunachal Pradesh, Meghalaya, Mizoram, and Nagaland, more than 90% of the population is tribal. However, in the remaining northeast states of Assam, Manipur, Sikkim, and Tripura, tribal peoples form between 20 and 30% of the population. Other tribal peoples, including the Santals, live in Jharkhand and West Bengal. Central Indian states have the country's largest tribes, and, taken as a whole, roughly 75% of the total tribal population live there. Although the tribal population there accounts for only around 10% of the region's total population, smaller numbers of tribal people are found in Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala in South India, in Western India in Gujarat and Rajasthan, and in the Union Territories of Lakshadweep and the Andaman Islands and Nicobar Islands. About 1% of the populations of Kerala and Tamil Nadu are tribal, whereas about 6% in Andhra Pradesh and Karnataka are members of tribes. History. Ancient India. Although considered uncivilized and primitive, Adivasis were usually not held to be intrinsically impure by surrounding casted Hindu populations, unlike Dalits, who were. Thus, the Adivasi origins of Valmiki, who composed the Ramayana, were acknowledged, as were the origins of Adivasi tribes such as the Garasia and Balala, which descended from mixed Rajput and Bhil marriages. Unlike the subjugation of the Dalits, the Adivasis often enjoyed autonomy and, depending on region, evolved mixed hunter-gatherer and farming economies, controlling the lands as a joint patrimony of the tribe. In some areas, securing Adivasi approval and support was considered crucial by local rulers, and larger Adivasi groups were able to sustain their own kingdoms in central India. The Gond Rajas of Garha Mandla and Chanda are examples of an Adivasi aristocracy that ruled in this region, and were not only the hereditary leaders of the Gond subjects, but also held sway over substantial communities of non-tribals who recognized them as the feudal lords. period of Islamic invasions. This relative autonomy and collective ownership of Adivasi land by Adivasis was severely disrupted by the advent of the Mughals in the early 16th century. Rebellions against Mughal authority include the Bhil Rebellion of 1632 and the Bilgond insurrection of 1643, which were both pacified by Mughal soldiers. British period. From the very early days of British rule, the tribesmen resented the British encroachments upon the tribal system. They were found resisting as supporting the brethren of Tamar and Jalda in rebellion. Nor did the Raja welcome the British administrative innovations. Beginning in the 18th century, the British added to the consolidation of feudalism in India, first under the Jagirdari system and then under the Zamindari system, beginning with the permanent settlement imposed by the British in Bengal and Bihar, which later became the template for a deepening of feudalism throughout India. The older social and economic system in the country began to alter radically. Land, both forest areas belonging to Adivasis and settled farmland belonging to non-Adivasi peasants, was rapidly made the legal property of British-designated zamindars, who in turn moved to extract the maximum economic benefit possible from the newfound property and subjects. Adivasi lands sometimes experienced an influx of non-local settlers, often brought from far away by the zamindars to better exploit local land, forest and labor. Deprived of the forests and resources they traditionally depended on and sometimes coerced to pay taxes, many Adivasis were forced to borrow at usurious rates from moneylenders, or often the zamindars themselves, when they were unable to pay, that forced them to become bonded laborers for the zamindars. Often, far from paying off the principal of their debt, they were unable even to offset the compounding interest, and this was made the justification for the children working for the zamindar after the death of the initial borrower. In the case of the Andamanese Adivasis, long isolated from the outside world in autonomous societies, mere contact with outsiders was often sufficient to set off deadly epidemics in tribal populations, and it is alleged that some sections of the British government directly attempted to destroy some tribes. Land dispossession and subjugation by British and zamindar interests resulted in a number of Adivasi revolts in the late 18th and early 19th centuries, such as the Santalhal of 1855–56. Although these were suppressed ruthlessly by the governing British authority, partial restoration of privileges to Adivasi elites and some leniency in tax burdens resulted in relative calm, despite continuing and widespread dispossession from the late 19th century onwards. The economic deprivation, in some cases, triggered internal Adivasi migrations within India that would continue for another century, including as labor for the emerging tea plantations in Assam. Participation in Indian independence movement. There were tribal reform and rebellion movements during the period of the British Empire, some of which also participated in the Indian independence movement or attacked mission posts. There were several Adivasis in the Indian independence movement, including Darinder Bhuwan, Laxman Naik, Jantubil, Bangaru Devi and Rama Vasai. List of rebellions during the period of British rule. India saw the rebellions of several backward castes, mainly tribal peoples that revolted against British rule. These were Great Kuki Invasion of 1860s, Halba Rebellion, Chakma Rebellion, Tua Rebellion in Bengal, Bhopalpatnam Struggle, Kurda Rebellion in Odisha, Bhil Rebellion, Paralkot Rebellion, Tarapur Rebellion, Maria Rebellion, First Freedom Struggle by Siju Murma and Kanu Murma, Bhil Rebellion begun by Tantutop in Banswara, Khoi Revolt, Gond Rebellion begun by Ramji Gond in Adilabad, Muria Rebellion, Rani Rebellion, Bhumkal, A Kuki uprising in Manipur. First Rampa rebellion Visakhapatnam. Second Rampa rebellion Visakhapatnam Dist. Santhal revolt. Munda rebellion. Yadav rebellion. Tribal classification criteria and demands. Population complexities and the controversies surrounding ethnicity and language in India sometimes make the official recognition of groups as Adivasis political and contentious. However, regardless of the language family affiliations, Australoid and Negrito groups that have survived as distinct forest, mountain or island-dwelling tribes in India and are often classified as Adivasi. The relatively autonomous Mongoloid tribal groups of northeastern India, who are mostly Austro-Asiatic and Tibeto-Burman speakers, are also considered to be Adivasis. This area comprises 7.5% of India's land area but 20% of its Adivasi population. However, not all autonomous northeastern groups are considered Adivasis. For instance, the Tibeto-Burman speaking Meitei of Manipur were once tribal but, having been settled for many centuries, are caste Hindus. It is also difficult, for a given social grouping, to definitively decide whether it is a caste or a tribe. A combination of internal social organization, relationship with other groups, self-classification and perception by other groups has to be taken into account to make a categorization, which is at best inexact and open to doubt. These categorizations have been diffused for thousands of years, and even ancient formulators of caste discriminatory legal codes were unable to come up with clean distinctions. Demands for tribal classification. The additional difficulty in deciding whether a group meets the criteria to be Adivasi or not are the aspirational movements created by the federal and state benefits, including job and educational reservations, enjoyed by groups listed as scheduled tribes. In Manipur, Meitei commentators have pointed to the lack of scheduled tribe status as a key economic disadvantage for Meiteis competing for jobs against groups that are classified as scheduled tribes. In Assam, Rajbangshi representatives have demanded scheduled tribe status as well. In Rajasthan, the Gujar community has demanded SAN status, even blockading the national capital of Delhi to press the demand. However, the government of Rajasthan declined the Gujars' demand, stating the Gujars are treated as upper caste and are by no means a tribe. In several cases, these claims to tribalhood are disputed by tribes who are already listed in the schedule and fear economic losses if more powerful groups are recognized as scheduled tribes. For instance, the Rajbangshi demand faces resistance from the Bodo tribe, and the Meena tribe has vigorously opposed Gujar aspirations to be recognized as a scheduled tribe. Endogamy, exogamy and ethnogenesis. Part of the challenge is that the endogamous nature of tribes is also conformed to by the vast majority of Hindu castes. Indeed, many historians and anthropologists believe that caste endogamy reflects the once tribal origins of the various groups who now constitute the settled Hindu castes. Another defining feature of caste Hindu society, which is often used to contrast them with Muslim and other social groupings, is lineage, clan and village exogamy. However, these in-marriage taboos are also held ubiquitously among tribal groups, and do not serve as reliable differentiating markers between caste and tribe. Again, this could be an ancient import from tribal society into settled Hindu castes. Interestingly, tribes such as the Muslim Gujars of Kashmir and the Kalash of Pakistan observe these exogamous traditions in common with caste Hindus and non-Kashmiri Adivasis, though the surrounding Muslim populations do not. Some anthropologists, however, draw a distinction between tribes who have continued to be tribal and tribes that have been absorbed into caste society in terms of the breakdown of tribal boundaries and the proliferation of new mixed caste groups. In other words, ethnogenesis in tribes occurs through a fission process, whereas with settled castes it usually occurs through intermixture. Other criteria: unlike castes which form part of a complex and interrelated local economic exchange system, tribes tend to form self-sufficient economic units. For most tribal people, land use rights traditionally derive simply from tribal membership. Tribal society tends to the egalitarian, with its leadership based on ties of kinship and personality rather than on hereditary status. Tribes typically consist of segmentary lineages whose extended families provide the basis for social organization and control. Tribal religion recognizes no authority outside the tribe. Any of these criteria may not apply in specific instances. Language does not always give an accurate indicator of tribal or caste status, especially in regions of mixed population. Many tribal groups have lost their original languages and simply speak local or regional languages. In parts of Assam, an area historically divided between warring tribes and villages, increased contact among villages began during the colonial period, and has accelerated since independence in 1947. A pidgin Assamese developed, whereas educated tribal members learned Hindi and, in the late 20th century, English. Self-identification and group loyalty do not provide unfailing markers of tribal identity either. In the case of stratified tribes, the loyalties of clan, kin, and family may well predominate over those of tribe. In addition, tribes cannot always be viewed as people living apart. The degree of isolation of various tribes has varied tremendously. The Gonds, Santals, and Bhils traditionally have dominated the regions in which they have lived. Moreover, tribal society is not always more egalitarian than the rest of the rural populace. Some of the larger tribes, such as the Gonds, are highly stratified. The apparently wide fluctuation in estimates of South Asia's tribal population through the 20th century gives a sense of how unclear the distinction between tribal and non-tribal can be. India's 1931 census enumerated 22 million tribal people. In 1941 only 10 million were counted, but by 1961 some 30 million, and in 1991 nearly 68 million tribal members were included. The differences among the figures reflect changing census criteria and the economic incentives individuals have to maintain or reject classification as a tribal member. These gyrations of census data serve to underline the complex relationship between caste and tribe. Although, in theory, these terms represent different ways of life and ideal types, in reality they stand for a continuum of social groups, in areas of substantial contact between tribes and castes. Social and cultural pressures have often tended to move tribes in the direction of becoming castes over a period of years. Tribal peoples with ambitions for social advancement in Indian society at large have tried to gain the classification of caste for their tribes. On occasion, an entire tribe, a part of a tribe, joined a Hindu sect and thus entered the caste system en masse. If a specific tribe engaged in practices that Hindus deemed polluting, the tribe's status when it was assimilated into the caste hierarchy would be affected.